I've been using monofilament mainlines now for the past sort of 5 to 6 years. I used to swear by fluorocarbon, but ever since transitioning over, I've never looked back. And I think that's because of how versatile mono is. It's really abrasion resistant, it also sinks well, it's relatively low in diameter, and it also casts really well. Even with scopes, sort of 10-foot rods, I've fished comfortably over 100 yards. So I just find that it works for a variety of different fishing styles, and that's the reason why I've stuck with mono for the last 5 to 6 years. Since Nash have brought out the new Armour line, it's just enhanced those properties even further. Combined with that, it also has a high knot strength, which means I'm totally confident in all fishing situations. A lot of my fishing is done in the city, which means there's snags everywhere. Sunken trees, shopping trolleys, boats. So I never tend to go below a 20-pound breaking strain, which might seem crazy to some people. And I once thought that that would be my close quarters line, snag fishing, and then I would have to go down to a 15 for casting, but it's just not the case. And especially with this new Armour line, where it's low in diameter, 0.40 in 20 pounds. Not only is it great for close quarters, abrasion resistant, it really makes sure you land every fish you hook, but also, for example, a recent campaign of mine, I was fishing just over 100 yards with 10-foot rods, and I was happily casting with that 20-pound line. So it really is a versatile line. Another thing I really like about this main line is it's low enough stretch to get good bite indication and also be able to feel the lead down at distance. But also, when you're playing a fish at close quarters, it's got that nice little bit of give, which stops you suffering from hook pulls. So Armour line actually comes in 4 different breaking strains. You've got 12 pounds in 0.30 diameter, you've got 15 pounds in 0.35, you've got 20 pounds in 0.40, and you've now got the 25 pounds in 0.45. Now for me, this genuinely covers all scenarios. Whether you're fishing an open lake with no snags and you really want to cast as far as possible, 12 pound is the one for you. Or on the furthest end of it, like for example the style of fishing I do, really close quarters, snaggy, that 25 pound is going to be a massive edge. It comes in 1,000 metre spools in translucent green and also UV coloration. And this is the perfect amount to spool up 3 reels. The Armour line monofilament truly is a main line that you can take anywhere.
I feel like using braid isn't typically for everyone, but I started a few years ago now, a few seasons ago, and since moving over to using braid as a main line, particularly sinking braid, I've honestly never looked back. You hear it so much in fishing. Oh, that product's not going to change, especially us. That product's not going to change your angling. It's not going to catch you more fish. Without a shadow of a doubt, using braided mainline in my fishing is one of those products which has caught me more fish over the last few years. One of the best things about using a braided mainline for me is that zero stretch element. It takes away any doubt on what you're fishing over. You know, we use a braided mainline for our marker rods when we're leading up and when we're finding a spot. We then switch over to a mono sometimes. We cast out to the same spot and it goes from, boom, yeah, that's the one, that's the spot, to, is that it? It's a bit softer, I can't feel it as well. And that is just down to the stretch in the mono. Switch over to a braided mainline, all of that doubt is just completely eradicated. You know exactly what you're fishing on, you know you're on the spot. And for me, it just fills me with so much more confidence. Following a close second, I think braided mainline and its improvement to bite indication has to be right up there for me. I think we can be guilty as anglers that we just think that, you know, when the fish picks that bait up, you're getting beeps on that alarm. With mono, it's just not the case, especially when I use this over in Europe. You know, braided mainline is my go-to if I'm fishing in Europe, when you're fishing, you know, maybe a lot further out because you're using a boat. But the same applies for the UK as well. If I'm fishing at 60, 70, 80, 100 yards and I'm using a mono, have no doubt in your mind that that fish can move that lead quite a long way before you're getting indications on your alarm. Braid is just not the case. Again, because there's zero stretch, as soon as anything is moving that lead, you're getting indications on that alarm. Braided mainline also super strong. It's very tough, it's very abrasion resistant, and it's something I really need in my angling. A lot of the lakes I fish, you know, there is weed present. There is a tendency to get a fish weeded up if I'm so lucky to hook one, and I just need to have that confidence in my main line that it's not going to part at that crucial moment. And I think finally, casting, it doesn't actually apply for all sinking braids. Some can be quite coarse, some can be very tough, which turn means they're not great for casting. The one that we've got come out, the new Nash one, it's a low diameter braid, and for me, I find it a lot better to cast than a lot of monofilaments in the same sort of breaking strain. So another massive benefit for me is that I can fish with it at a very long range. Obviously, I'm not sitting here talking about braided mainline for no reason. Nash have just released a whole new range of mainlines, and within that, we have Baseline, which is our sinking braid. It's slightly different to some of the other sinking braids on the market. It's an 8+1 construction. Now, what does that mean? It means it's an 8-strand woven Dyneema braid, but it's got a sinking core, which is the +1. This means that it's got a very low diameter, very round profile, which is ideal for spooling up, but it also helps it cut through that surface film and sink like a brick. Right, this is going to be the hard bit for me. We do it in 4 different breaking strains. That's 20 pound at 0.20 mil, that's 25 pound at 0.24, 30 pound at 0.28, and 40 pound at 0.35. One thing to remember, it's also a linear breaking strain rating, which means that in the past where I've typically gone for a 15 pound, I actually jump up to a 25 or a 30 pound breaking strain. This just suits my fishing. You know, that 30 pound breaking strain, it's a 0.28 diameter. It means it's mega for casting, and also when I'm in Europe, I can get loads on a spool where I'm towing those baits a long distance. Unfortunately, in the UK, there's a lot of venues which don't allow a braided mainline, so if that's the case, I do just go over to a monofilament. However, if you get the chance to use a braided mainline and you've had doubts of using it, I urge you, please give it a go, because like I said at the beginning, it is one of those items which really has made a massive, massive change in my fishing.
Over the last few years, day crickets have become busier and busier as more anglers are hitting the bank, and as a result, the carp are pushing out to the middle of especially larger lakes to find a bit of safety. Now me, as an angler, I want to be able to get my rig exactly where them fish are holding up. And that's the reason why over the last 6 months I've been using Skyline. Skyline is an ultra low diameter mainline, which means there's less friction going through the eyes on the cast. Yes, it might only add a few extra yards onto your cast, but that can make all the difference. Another great feature that I like about Skyline is it's sort of a hybrid between braid and other monofilaments on the market. Mono is quite a stretchy material, whereas braid, there is zero stretch whatsoever. I'm sure you've had it in the past, you've got the leading rod out, you've found a perfect gravel spot, maybe 100, 120 yards out in the lake, it feels perfect, you've baited up, you've went to get your fishing rods out there, and you can't seem to find the spot again. The reason for this is, with monofilament, it's super stretchy, and I'm sure that your rig is still landing on the exact same spot, but with that stretch, the drop's almost muffled and sort of muted a little bit on the rod tip. However, with Skyline, since it's, like I said, a bit of a hybrid, you can get nice firm drops even when you're fishing out at range. In the past, when fishing out at range, bite indication has been a bit of a problem, especially with mono. With all that stretch, them carp can move meters before you get a registration on the bite alarm. But with Skyline, since it's got minimal stretch, as soon as a carp picks up the rig, I'm knowing about it on the R4 alarm, and I know that I'm hooked into a carp. And that is another great feature about this line. Skyline is available in ultra low visibility and UV yellow. My personal preference when it comes to fishing out at range is UV yellow. Now the reason I choose this mainline is when you're fishing 3 rods on a spot out at range, sometimes it can be a little bit hard to see if them lines are crossing. However, whether it's day or night, I can just go out there with the UV head torch and check if them lines are crossed or not. Both the UV and ultra low visibility is available in 8 to 15 pounds. My personal preference is the 12 pound, which is 0.30mm in diameter. And the reason why I like to use this mainline is, like I said, it helps with the casting with the low diameter, but also if I hook a carp and it snags me up in a bit of weed or a bit of snags, I'm able to safely extract that fish from wherever it's snarled up. Whenever you're fishing out at range, it is so important that you use a braided shock leader. Even if you're using the 15 pound version, I'd recommend using braid. And the reason for that is, when you're fishing out at range, the last thing that you want to do is crack off, leave terminal tackle out in the lake, or potentially even knock out the guy on the far bank with a 4 or even 5 ounce lead. If you're one of them people who are a little bit put off by the UV yellow, just think you've got a braided leader on for the final 2-3 rod lengths. So towards the rig, it's all going to be camouflaged, all pinned down on the bottom, and trust me, I've been using the yellow in the UK and abroad, And hand on heart, I don't believe it spooks any carp whatsoever. If you're someone who's into long range fishing or you're wanting to add extra distance onto your cast, make sure to check out the full range of Skyline.
Mainline choice is such an important consideration in your tackle, with each variation catering to a different angling scenario or environment you may find yourself fishing. Bearing this in mind, there are certain circumstances where my #1 choice of Mainline is Highline neutral buoyancy braid. So firstly, let's look at the attributes unique to a neutral buoyancy braid. It is very, very thin, far thinner than a sinking braid or a mono. Despite the extremely low diameter of the line, it's still fantastically abrasion resistant, dealing with snags and weed very, very easily. Secondly, as the name does suggest, it is neutrally buoyant. That does mean that it will hang on the surface film, or when it's pulled under the water, it will hang in mid-water. And thirdly, and this is probably the most important aspect, it has zero stretch. Braid is renowned for having zero stretch in it, which means when you're feature finding or when you're fishing at mega range, it really comes into its own. With those attributes in mind, let's talk about the situations I'll use it in. Firstly, when I'm casting absolute mega distances and rules allow me to use braid. As I said before, braid is extremely, extremely thin compared to a mono counterpart. Because of this, it is a great tool for casting. One of the main reasons that restrict your casting distance is friction, and friction can be caused by thicker line hitting the spool or hitting the eyes of the rod. By having a nice thin line, there's less friction and it means you can cast much further. Of course, some venues in the UK won't allow you to use braid, but when they do and your objective is to cast further, then Highline neutral buoyancy braid is the option you should go for. The second situation where I find myself using Highline braid a lot is when I'm boat fishing, particularly over in Europe. Firstly, the reason I want to do this is when I'm fishing mega distances, you need to have zero stretch in your main line so that you actually get bite indication. Over 30, 40 yards, a bit of stretch in your main line, it won't make a difference to bite indication. But when you're fishing 2, 3, even 400 meters, that stretch of that main line, it can really have an effect on your bite indication. So having zero stretch at that distance means that when the lead moves, you know about it. For the extreme distances, I do favour using a neutral buoyancy braid as opposed to a sinking braid, such as our baseline. The reason for this is when you come back from dropping your rod, if you don't come back in a perfectly straight line, there will be some bow in the line. And sometimes when that line sinks, such as baseline, which it will do, trying to correct that line to make it nice and tight direct to your lead, it can be quite difficult. You may even end up moving the lead as you're trying to correct that line. So having a neutral buoyancy braid means that any corrections you need to make are far, far easier. And another bonus as to why you should use Highline when you're doing this type of fishing is if there's any snags between your rod and your actual rig. Imagine you're fishing 200 yards out and there's a big snag in the water and you want to be fishing over this. By having a Highline neutral buoyancy braid, it will ensure that your braid stays above this snag and that you're not going to get it sank into it like you would with a sinking braid. This is very important when it comes to fishing safely and effectively, and this is why I'll use the neutral buoyancy braid in this type of fishing. Highline braid is available in 2 different colours, green and UV yellow. It's also available in 4 different breaking strain options. In 25 pound, 0.18mm diameter, 30 pound, 0.24mm diameter, 35 pound, 0.28mm diameter, and 40 pound, 0.35mm diameter. They're also available in 600 metre and 1200 metre spool sizes. So if you're looking to try and cast some mega distances, do a bit of boat fishing over in Europe, or you're just looking for that ideal all-round neutral buoyancy braid, then Highline is the option for you.